This is Miss O. Reads Flush, Chapter 4. The next morning the lawyer stopped by our house. Mr. Shine looked about 1,000 years old, but Mom said he knew his way around the courthouse. She had hired him twice before to get my father out of trouble. Mr. Shine put his briefcase on the kitchen table and sat down. He looked mopey and gray, and his eyelids drooped. Abby said he reminded her of Eeyore from the Winnie the Pooh. My mother made a pot of coffee and began dropping hints that Abby and I should leave them alone. Abby grabbed a bagel out of the toaster and ran off to play on the computer. I got my spinning rod from the garage and biked up to the drawbridge at Snake Creek. The police won't let you fish from the top of the bridge because of the traffic, but you can go down underneath and cast from the sandbags in the shade. Sometimes homeless people sleep under the bridges, but they usually don't bother anybody. The last time I'd been to Snake Creek, some woman in an army jacket had made a campsite high on the bank under the concrete braces. She even started a small fire, burning the wood slats from a broken stone crab trap. I gave her a nice mangrove snapper that I caught, and she had it cleaned and cooking over the flames in 5 minutes flat. She said it was the best meal she'd eaten in a year. The next day, Abby and I went back with some homemade bread and a pound of fresh shrimp, but the lady was gone. I never even got her name. On the day Mom was meeting with Mr. Shine, nobody was under the bridge when I got there. The tide was running in from the ocean, and schools of finger mullet were holding in the still water behind the pilings. Every so often they'd start jumping, trying to escape some bigger fish that was prowling for lunch. I started casting a white bucktail, and in no time jumped a baby tarpon that wasn't even 10 pounds. Then I hooked something heavy, probably a snook, that ran out 100 feet and broke the line. As I was tying on another jig, I heard an outboard engine. It was a John boat, maybe 12 feet long, motoring along Snake Creek. 2 people were in the boat, and as it drew closer, I recognized them as Jasper Jr. and an older kid named Bull. They spotted me right away. I probably should have taken off, but I was really enjoying myself fishing under that bridge, so I set down my spinning rod and watched Jasper Jr. nose the John boat into the shallows. Bull was in the bow. He climbed out first and looped a rope around one of the pilings. He's a hefty guy, but that's not how he got his nickname. People call him Bull because you can't believe a word he says. For instance, he told everyone at school he was dropping out to play double-A ball for the Baltimore Orioles. This is at an age 16, right? We all knew that Bull couldn't catch a pop fly if it landed in his lap, so we weren't exactly surprised to see him bagging groceries at that spring at Winn-Dixie. After Bull tied off the John boat, he called up to me, "Hey, buttface, better run for your life. Jasper's got a spear gun." "Yeah, right," I said. When Jasper Jr. hopped out of the boat, I saw that he didn't have a spear gun or any other weapon. Even so, running away would have been an excellent idea. I just didn't feel like it. Jasper Jr. walked up and asked, "What are you looking at?" "Absolutely nothing," I said with a straight face. "I told you I was going to find you, didn't I?" I knew that Jasper Jr. wasn't looking for me at Snake Creek. He and Bull were headed out to poach lobsters or pull some other mischief. But I played along. "Well, you found me. Now what?" That's when he socked me in the right eye. It hurt, too. Jasper Jr. seemed surprised that I didn't fall down. So was Bull. He said, "You got a hard head for a butt-face." The way my cheekbone was throbbing, I figured that Jasper Jr.'s knuckers weren't feeling so good either. He was trying to act like a tough guy, but I noticed that his eyes were watering from the pain. I probably could have knocked him flat, but I didn't. My father's a large man, very strong, but he says fighting is for people who can't win with their brains. He also says there are times when you've got no choice but to defend yourself from common morons. If Jasper Jr. had taken another swing at me, I definitely would have punched him back. Then Bull would have beaten me to a pulp, and the whole thing would have been over. But Jasper Jr. didn't hit me again. Instead, he spit in my face, which was way worse. He forced a laugh and called me a couple dirty names and headed back toward the John boat. He was shaking the hand that he hit me with as if it were a crab or a mousetrap attached to it. Bull was following behind, cackling like a hyena. They got into the boat and Jasper Jr. jerk-started the outboard while Bull shoved off from the bow. I pulled up the front of my shirt and wiped the spit off my face. Then I grabbed my fishing rod and took aim. The bucktail jig I happened to be using weighed 1/4 of an ounce, which doesn't sound like much until it thumps you between the shoulder blades, which is where I thumped Jasper Jr. It was an awesome cast, I've got to admit. The hook on the jig snagged firmly in the mesh of Jasper Jr.'s ratty old baseball jersey, and he let out a howl. I gave a stiff yank, and he howled again. In a panic, he twisted the throttle. The John boat picked up speed. But that didn't help. Jasper Jr. was stuck on the end of my line like a moray eel. He hollered for Bull to cut him loose, which was all right with me. I'd made my point. Bull found a knife and clambered to the back of the boat, which turned out to be a humongous mistake. With so much weight in the stern, Bull, Jasper Jr., plus the engine, the bow tilted upward and the John boat began taking on water. No sooner had Bull reached behind Jasper Jr. to cut the fishing line than the motor gurgled to a dead stop. The blue-green water of Snake Creek was pouring in over the transom, but nobody in the John boat moved. Jasper Jr. was yelling at Bull, and Bull was yelling back, and they just kept getting wetter and wetter. By now the motor was completely submerged, and the bow was nearly straight up in the air, which meant that the boat was about to capsize. Bull was first to jump, and Jasper Jr. right behind him. They started swimming like maniacs toward the bumper of the bridge, cursing the whole way. They were making such an awful racket that the mullet scattered out of the eddies, and I knew that the fishing was pretty much shot for the afternoon. So I reeled in my line and made my way up the slope toward the highway. "You did what?" Abby said when I told her what happened. "Geez, you're as whacked as Dad." "I didn't sink their stupid boat. They sunk it themselves." Abby muttered in exasperation. "If this keeps up, we're going to get run out of town. Mom will have to put up the house for sale." "Jasper Jr. spit on me," I said. "What happened to your eye?" "He did that too." After examining my bruise, Abby seemed more sympathetic. "From now on, don't go anywhere without Tom or Rado," she advised. It would have been a sensible plan, except that Tom's family was heading to North Carolina for the rest of the summer, and Rado was going camping in Colorado with his mother and stepdad. Tom and Rado were my best friends, and without them I was basically on my own. Mom came into the bedroom, and the first thing she noticed, naturally, was my black eye. I told her the whole story. Abby hung around to make sure. My mother was real angry, but I begged her not to call Dusty Muleman and tell him what Jasper Jr. had done. "It'll just make things worse," I said. "What could be worse than getting punched and spit at?" she asked. "Lots of things. Trust me, Mom." "Noah's right," Abby said. "We'll discuss this later." My mother's mouth wasn't moving much when she talked, which meant that she was still mad. "Noah, please go wash up. There's a gentleman waiting in the living room to speak with you." "Who is it?" I asked. "Is he from the police?" "No, from the newspaper," Mom said, making that sound even worse. "Apparently your father thought it'd be a brilliant idea to have an article written about himself. He sent the reporter here to interview you." Abby rolled her eyes. "You've got to be joking." "I wish I were," said my mother. "Hurry up, Noah, and put on a clean shirt. Please, I don't want you looking like some sort of juvenile delinquent." "Then you ought to put some makeup on his shiner," Abby suggested. "No way," I said, but it was too late. The reporter's name was Miles Umlatt. He was thin and blotchy, and his nose was scuffed up like an old shoe. Mom had stationed him on the sofa so that he could set his tape recorder on the coffee table. On his lap he held a lined yellow pad that was covered with scribbles. I sat down in the tall armchair where my father usually sits. Mom had dabbed some flesh-colored powder around my black eye, and she must have done a good job because Miles Umlatt didn't seem to notice. He asked what grade I was in, what sort of hobbies I enjoyed, did I own a cat or dog, the usual stuff. He was pretending to be nice, but I could tell it was a real chore. He was dying to get to the juicy parts. "I understand you've been to visit your father," he said finally. "That must have been tough." "Not really." I was trying to sound kind of cool and bored. "Yes, well, this isn't the first time your dad's had a scrape with the law, is it?" "No, sir." "What do you remember about the other times?" he asked. I just shrugged. It was amazing that Mom had left me alone in the room with this guy. I knew that she was hovering somewhere nearby, but at least for now I was free to say what I wanted. "I found an old clipping about the Carmichael family," Miles Umlatt said. He held up a photocopy to show me. "Well, that was a long time ago," I asked. "Only 3 years. "Are you sure?" I asked, although 3 years sounded about right. Here's what had happened, the way my father told it. The Carmichaels drove their 40-foot gas-hogging motorhome all the way to the Keys from someplace up in Michigan. They were too cheap to rent space at an RV park, so they parked along Highway 1 near the Indian Key Bridge and camped there for 3 nights, which would have been no big deal except for the way they treated their dogs. They had 2 chocolate Labrador retrievers that rode along with them in the motorhome. One morning, my dad was heading out on a tarpoon fishing charter when he spotted Mr. Carmichael whipping the dogs with a bungee cord. I guess the dogs had had an accident inside the Winnebago or something. Anyway, they were crying and yipping and trying to get away, but Mrs. Carmichael, who was the size of a whale, was standing on their leashes so that Mr. Carmichael could beat them. When Dad saw that, he sort of freaked. He beached the skiff, took out his harpoon gaff, and flattened every single tire. I think there were like 8 of them on the Carmichael's RV. Then he put the 2 Labradors in his boat and went fishing. The sheriff's deputies were waiting on the dock at the end of the day. My father confessed right away, as he always does, but he wouldn't apologize. He also wouldn't say what he had done with the dogs because he knew they'd be safer away from the Carmichaels. That time, Dad only spent 2 nights in jail before he let my mom bail him out. Eventually, he pled guilty to vandalism and, I guess, dog napping, although he agreed to pay for the Labradors and a new set of Winnebago tires. Later, we found out that Dad probably would have beaten the charges because the Carmichaels had refused to come back to the Keys for the trial. They wrote a letter to the judge saying that my father was a raving lunatic and they were scared to be in the same county with him, which was ridiculous. Anyway, my dad said that running those puppy-whipping lowlifes out of the islands was worth the legal hassle. A public service is what he called it. The 2 chocolate labs ended up with some friends of ours, nice people who run an Italian restaurant down in Marathon. I listened while Miles Umlatt went through the whole story again. Dad just lost his temper, I said when he was done, but those people were wrong. It's against the law to treat animals like that. Miles Umlatt wrote that down on his pad, which made me a little nervous. So did the tiny green light blinking on his tape recorder. Dad's just got to work on his self-control, I added. Are you ever afraid of him? I burst out laughing. It was such a lame question. Afraid of my dad? Are you serious? Well, Noah, you've got to admit, Miles Umlatt said. His behavior has been erratic. Unpredictable, I mean. I knew perfectly well what erratic meant. Dad wouldn't hurt a flea, I said firmly. But would he hurt a human who hurt a flea? That's when Mom breezed in to refill Miles Umlatt's coffee cup, or at least that was her excuse. How's it going, fellas? She asked. Just fine, Mrs. Underwood, said Miles Umlatt. Noah's a bright young man. I felt like sticking my finger down my throat. Mom flashed her fake polite smile and said, yes, we're very proud of him. She hung around for a while making small talk until the phone rang in the kitchen. As soon as we were alone again, Miles Umlatt leaned forward and said, Noah, what can you tell me about the incident with Derek Mays? Not much. I was sure he already knew the whole story. Everybody in Upper Keys did. And what he didn't know, he could have found out from the Coast Guard files. Derek said he was afraid for his life, Miles Umlatt said. Maybe he was just afraid of getting busted. Here's what my dad said had happened. He was out bone fishing with 2 doctors from New Jersey when he spotted Derek Mays stringing a gill net near Little Rabbit Key. Gill nets were outlawed years ago in Florida because they kill everything that gets tangled, not just the bait fish, but sharks, red snooks, tarpon, turtles, you name it, it dies. To make things worse, the island where Derek Mays was poaching was deep in Everglades National Park, which is totally protected, or supposed to be. When he spotted my father, Derek hauled out the gill net and made a run for it. Dad's skiff is super quick, and it didn't take long for him to catch up. Derek refused to stop, so my father leaped right into his boat. Then it turned into a wrestling match, and things got ugly. By the time the park rangers arrived, Dad had wrapped up Derek in his own net like a big, dumb mullet. But here's the part that really got to me. Not a darn thing happened to Derek because none of the rangers actually witnessed what he was doing in Little Rabbit. Meanwhile, Dad gets accused of, assault, and then the government takes away his captain's license because, they said, he endangered the lives of his customers by chasing after Derek at high speed. Of course, the 2 doctors on Dad's boat said they never had so much fun, but that didn't account for the squat with the Coast Guard, which is why my father had to start driving a cab. Miles Zoomlat said, "There seems to be a pattern to these episodes, wouldn't you say?" "It's not like it happens every day," I said. The guy was definitely getting on my nerves. I was sort of annoyed at my father for choosing me to be the one for the interview. The only reason I knew was that Mom had refused to do it. "Let's talk about what happened to the Coral Queen," said Miles Umlat, and he droned through that whole story. He told me that Dusty Muleman denied flushing polluted water from his gambling boat, which was no big surprise. Why would you ever admit to a crime? "He threatened to sue your father for slander," Miles Umlat said. "What's that?" "Saying something bad about a person that isn't true." "Dad doesn't lie," I said. "He might do some crazy stuff, but he always tells the truth." "Are you proud of him, Noah?" That was a tricky one. I wasn't proud that my dad was sitting in jail, but I knew he was a good person. Even when he flies off the handle, at least he's fighting for someone close to his heart. Too many people these days, they just turn their backs or close their eyes, pretending everything is wonderful in the world. Well, it's not. "I am proud of my father," I said to Miles Umlat, for standing up for what he believes. But like I said, once in a while he goes too far. Miles Umlat jotted down every word. "Your dad said he considers himself a political prisoner. Would you agree with that?" Political prisoner, I thought. Give me a break. I knew Mom wasn't eavesdropping because she would have blown a fuse. "Well, I don't know much about politics," I said carefully, "but he's definitely a prisoner." Miles Umlat seemed to think that was very funny. He wrote it down, closed his notebook, and switched off the tape recorder. "Thank you, Noah. That was perfect," he said. Then he shook my hand and skittered out the front door. My mother was still on the phone in the kitchen. She gave me a thumbs-up signal when I came in to grab some cookies. On the way to my room, I stopped outside Abby's doorway and listened. She was crying, which got me worried because my sister hardly ever cries. I opened the door to check on her. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with a box of Kleenex on her lap and a pile of pink crumpled-up tissues on the floor. I could tell she was really upset because she didn't holler at me for barging in without knocking. "What's wrong?" I asked. "It's Mom," she sniffed. "But I just saw her. She seemed okay." Abby shook her head. "That lawyer, Shine." She was trying to catch her breath between sobs. "What about him? He won't take Dad's case?" "Worse," Abby stammered. "I heard Mom ask him." Here she paused to snatch another tissue and dab her eyes. "Ask him what?" I said, impatiently. "She didn't know I was standing by the door." "Abby, it's all right. Calm down, okay?" "Okay." She straightened up and swallowed hard, and for a moment she looked like her old brave self. "Now tell me," I said, "what was Mom asking Mr. Shine about?" "The D word," my sister whispered. "Divorce?" Abby nodded. Her lower lip began to tremble, and her shoulders went kind of slack, so I sat on the bed and put one arm around her and tried to act stronger than I felt.